as you've noticed when I play Snowy, I sort of like get into the sense of, okay, this is what I should be asking. This is what I should be playing, but I haven't yet pinned down the habit of like ask myself the question in the template, ask myself other questions about the players to adapt my play. Because looking back on it, I'm like, well, at a 1-3 table, I mean, the guy's like, this guy was tight, so what is he going to like go all in with, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just become second nature because I've been doing this since I started playing live poker when I was 18, and it's probably because I'm just so obsessively attentive to detail. And for me, I feel like I have a bit of ADHD, and in order to keep myself on track, it's important for me to have sort of an algorithm, and I
Yes.
can adapt within that algorithm. But if I start to lose focus, I know that I can always go back to that. So
Yeah.
it always starts pre-flop. I'm ultra methodical like that because I've noticed that if I don't pay attention to exact ranges pre-flop, everything I'm doing seems to fall apart later in the hand, and especially in ultra deep cash games. When you got to make big river decisions, your pre-flop opening range estimates have to be on point because if they're not, you might not even be sure if that hand is in somebody's range. So for me, it always starts with my opening range, how people perceive my opening range, and as a result, what does that make their ranges? Okay. Uh, so that right there just gives you a way better picture going post flop, and the rest of the hand almost plays itself out. So then once the flop comes, um, just ask yourself who has a range advantage.
Yeah.
It's typically the player in position with initiative. Um, then ask yourself what type of board is this? What am I trying to accomplish on this board? Right. So if you're going to bet, there are three reasons to bet. The first one is for value. The second one is as a bluff or a semi bluff.
Yeah.
And the third one is to actualize equity or buy up your opponent's overcard equity. If you can value bet and actualize your equity at the same time, even better. If you can't accomplish any of those three things by betting, checking is always the right play.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, if you're the same goes for out of position. So if somebody else opens, and let's say you're trying to defend out of the big blind, you just ask yourself, what is his range? As a result, what should my range be? What should my defense range be based off of pot odds and how well I think my opponent plays post flop? And then the third thing is just ask yourself if your opponent is even considering your range. What does he think your range looks like? Is it tight? Is it wide? Does he think you
Yeah.
three bet a lot? Does he think you don't three bet enough? And then go to the flop again. Ask yourself who has a range advantage on this board. Usually he will. And whenever your opponent has a range advantage, you should usually check to him. Then when he bets, just take a look at the math. First thing you start with is pot odds. The second thing you go to is minimum defense frequency. And if you feel that you're getting the right pot odds and implied odds to call, you stick it in there and consider turn a river situations. If not, you're usually folding or check raising. And if you're going to check raise, make sure that the flop has the right components for you to be check raising. So you have to have enough nutted value combos, and you also have to have enough semi bluffs to support those combos.
Yeah.
And if neither of those things are the case, you don't have the components you need to check raise, and you're not getting the right pot odds / implied odds to check call. Check folding is always the right option.
Yep.
And so for me, it's just understanding that almost every hand boils down to the same components, and then just being able to work within that framework is so much easier than kind of just shooting from the hip and haphazardly considering certain variables when they should always be running through your mind consciously.
Yeah. No, so thank you. And yeah, I mean, I will play with the template sort of on either on my screen or next to me, But there's two things. One is you get caught up in the game and you're sort of like playing, and so you don't necessarily. Even though I'm playing with Snowy, right? I could take 10 minutes for every end. Like, who cares? But there's one element there. I mean, partially, I think is I don't know if you look at like Myers-Briggs or any of those things for like people sort of type. The way I think is very different than yours.
What are you? Which of the 16 personalities?
I'm an extrovert. I'm a deep extrovert, and so essentially, it doesn't mean I'm not structured, but well, that's another issue. But it means most thoughts occur to me. Like I don't necessarily like until I train myself, sort of sear it in my brain. I will not go through the framework for like if I can save it.
Well, take everything I say with a grain of salt because I'm INTJ, so that's the. It's pretty polarized. You either end up being a CEO or a serial killer. It's only like 0.3% of the general population.
It's an either or.
It's pretty polarized.
Yes. But INTJs is great consultants as well, which is where I'm coming from. Most of my peers were INTJs, and I am ESTP or ENTP.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So.
Cool. I spend a lot of time on 16personalities.com.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so true that you only see what you know. So prior to that, I would just kind of try and categorize people with my own little methods. But then after reading that, I'm like, oh, okay, this guy is definitely introverted, etc. And it just gives me a way better read on people in social situations. Yes. But anyway, I mean, getting back to...
And I think, so partially it's because I think the second part, just going back to this, is sometimes I just don't know what to answer. And so I'm looking at the question, and I'm like, okay. And so what I was thinking is if you can just force me and help me through it.
Yeah, okay, for sure.
I just need to, I need to work. I mean, I'm convinced the template works. I mean, you're the obvious data point for why it works, right? And then at the same time, I'm like, I need to get extremely comfortable, sort of second sense with it. But as you said, always be sure that once I'm over that phase, I can always recall it whenever I want to and sort of work myself out of situations.
Yeah, and this is so crucial because this template forces you to be an autonomous creature. I think a lot of poker players are just on autopilot all day long.
Yeah.
And they just do the same thing over and over and over again, and it might not necessarily be the highest EV play.
Yep. Totally.
And so this forces you to, use the stick and turn it into manual and make sure that you're maximizing your EV in every situation. And it might seem annoying at first, but you'll see the value in it because it just forces you to slow down a little bit and really consider who you're playing against and consider the dynamic of each situation. It's difficult at first, but if you practice it enough, eventually it just becomes second nature and it clicks to you and immediately you understand what's going on. It always boils down to just 5 of those formulas, pot odds, pot equity, fold equity, minimum defense frequency, implied odds. That's it. And once you understand that, it all just ties together for you. So let's try and do that today, and just really slow down, play each hand one by one. We can do it in Snowy or advanced poker training, whatever you prefer.
So the reason I was suggesting, and maybe let's play it a little bit with it, and then we can go back to Snowy, was the reason I was going off on advanced poker training is why. Oh, and Snowy keeps on bugging a little bit. Basically in Snowy, it's very rare that you end up with a sort of defense situation, because a lot of things are going to be 3-bet, and so Snowy is basically he's calling the perfect amount of cards, which is probably a lot less than what quote unquote normal people do. And so my experience is advanced poker training, you end up with a lot more sort of those situations where somebody calls more than they should. They also donk bet a ton more. And so those are the ones where I've found myself recently to not know very well what to do, which is donk bets and I think my defense ranges might be off also, and so I may need to go back to sort of the drawing board with doing some hand analysis. But I just wanted to get your thoughts, seeing like working through
Yeah,
that.
so I've never experimented with advanced poker training. I know Mike Caro put this together
Yeah,
after a number of years, and I'm sure whatever he does is going to be pretty high quality.
yeah. I
But
mean,
the
to be
reason
honest,
I
I
was
don't
using
think I
Snowy so
care
much was
that much.
because I was really lacking a solid understanding of GTO play because I just never looked into it. I've always played live poker my whole life, but now that I've kind of established a good GTO foundation for you, I think advanced poker training could be useful because now you know that your opponents aren't playing perfectly. You know how they're deviating from optimal play, and that should give you an opportunity to construct an exploitative strategy.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I'm with you. I stopped when we started working together and sort of got back to it now just to sort of play more hands that feel more what I see in live play. Uh, I disregard the advice it gives me basically. It gives a lot. I mean, it's not GTO based, right? It's all based on sort of the more classic. What's the value of your hand, and like so there. I don't think it's the feedback part of advanced poker training is not what we're trying to achieve, but it's a good way to just have simulated people playing against you that are sort of not as perfect as Snowy, so it actually feels more like real life.
All right, let's fire it up. I'm excited.
Can you see it now?
Yeah.
All right. So but the other thing is you can also choose to only have playable hands, so you don't need to click 20 times before you actually get something.
Ah, okay.
So I'm playing a 6 max. I'm putting it at sort of the medium level. I put the blinds at 2.5. That's sort of whatever you want. I'll leave the chips fixed and play from all positions, right?
Yeah, I think that's in your best interest. Now, how many handed is this? Is it 9-handed, 6-handed?
This is 6.
Okay, I like that. That's good.
Yeah, yeah. You can choose 9 or 6, but anyway. So let's get going. All right. So I have Jack Queen.
So right away, you got to consider what your opponent's opening range is,
All right.
and
Okay. So
he's
his opening range is like 35% ish, right? So
yeah, he's on the button. If he's 3xing, it should be about 35%. Most people are opening more often than that. Then ask yourself how well does Queen Jack perform against a range like that? It's doing pretty well. You're getting a better price out of the big blind, and then you can also end the action. The other thing is that you're not playing out of the small blind, so you don't need to 3-bet to force the big blind out. So I think Queen Jack performs well as a call in this situation. And then the last thing is if you're playing against really good players, just ask yourself, what they think your defense range is. So a good place to start would be to ask yourself, what does my opponent think the worst hand I would defend with this?
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in
It's
this case, it's
like
probably like
4 or 5
5-4 suited or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just know what he's thinking in his head. So
Yep.
just go ahead and click the call button, I guess. Now on the spot, before you do anything, don't fall into the habit of just being the guy that checks dark every hand. You ask yourself who has a range advantage on this board, why. What parts of your range hit this board? What parts of your opponent's range hit this board? Are there ways that you can exploit him, right?
Yeah.
So in this situation, this guy for sure has a range advantage because his range is uncapped. He has ace king and kings, and you don't.
Yep.
So I prefer that you check to him and evaluate.
All right.
So he checked back. What does that mean about it? What does that say about his range?
Well, if you were playing normally, you probably basically said he doesn't have those top hands, right?
Well,
it's actually probably pretty weak. He either has like something that he wants to exploit for value, so he would have trip kings. Somewhat unlikely. I think most players would still bet with trip kings, or well, yeah. I mean, he should play a lot of hands here, so it's probably the very low end of his range.
Yeah, automatically I would assume that there are no king X combos in my opponent's range. The second thing that I would assume is that there are no diamond combos in my opponent's range.
Yeah. Yep.
So at best, he could have an ace high flush draw here. I think the majority of his range is going to be ace X, like ace 9. I think he would probably see bet with ace queen and ace jack because of the gut shot and the overs.
Yeah.
And I think the rest of his range is pocket pairs under a 10. And maybe some give ups in there, like just total air 6-5 of clubs stuff. So there are two things you can do here. You for sure need to bet this turn because your opponent's range is weak, and now you actually have a range advantage in this situation. Okay, betting queen jack, you have equity. So if you hit a queen or a jack, it's probably good at showdown.
Yeah.
And then if you hit an ace or a 9, it's probably good at showdown as well, unless it's a diamond. If a diamond comes off, I would still bet because I just don't think that your opponent has enough combos of the ace of diamonds to really defend enough on the river.
Yeah.
And now you just have to consider bet sizing. So do you want to go with like a half pot bet and then follow through on the river? Or what I might do is actually bet twice the pot on the turn and then just force him off all of his equity. He wouldn't even be able to call with the ace of diamonds. So which one do you think is better against this opponent?
Well, I mean, first off, I never consider overbetting, so probably my fault. So, good question. So I mean, it comes down to what are we betting for, right? We're
we know that we know that we need to semi-bluff here to balance out our range. So the times that we have king X or 10's full or king 10 or diamond combos, we want to be able to value bet.
Yeah.
But in order to give our opponent incentive to call our value bets, it's important for us to occasionally semi-bluff. Queen Jack is one of the best candidates to do that with.
Yeah.
Because it also allows you to follow through on diamond rivers and actually have bluffs. Some people only semi-bluff with a diamond in their hand on this turn, and then when the fourth diamond comes off, they always have the nuts.
Yep.
And I don't think that's a productive way to construct your range. So in this spot, I would probably bet $64 and plan on taking the pot down over 90% of the time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And why that over output bet?
Because I think people tend to get sticky after they've put one bet in on a previous streak. And I would prefer to just end it now and buy up all of my opponent's equity, knowing that I can get them to fold a huge percentage of the time.
All right.
And really the only way that your opponent's going to be able to exploit that is if he starts deliberately checking back with king X combos, which nobody's ever going to do against you.